as important as the fight against climate change is, I don't think it's a top priority right now. At least not if it's at the cost of competitiveness. We need to get a strong economy, we need to get a strong military, and we need to get a strong political union in order to survive with our way of life in this new world order.
Hey Space Watchers, and welcome to Space Café Radio. We are recording at a moment where global security feels compressed. Davos is underway, Berlin is preparing for a flagship security conference, and Washington has now had a full year under President Trump's second term. My guest today is Dr. Patrick Keller, Deputy Research Director at the German Council on Foreign Relations and head of its Center for Security and Defense. Patrick, great to have you at Space Café Radio. How are you doing today?
I'm very well. Thank you, Torsten. It's a pleasure to be on air with you.
You have been writing some of the clearest and most unsettling analysis of what this new global order actually means for Germany and Europe. So let's dive in. In your recent DGAP commentary, you argued that we are no longer drifting but arriving in a world defined by power politics, influence zones, and strengths. 1 year into Trump's presidency, what is the single most important misconception Europe and Germany in particular still holds about the international order? And I know we are starting with an easy question to warm up.
I think there are many misconceptions that turn out to be misconceptions. Maybe they weren't misconceptions in the past, but now in the current conditions, they are. And if I had to pick one, I'd say our greatest misconception at the moment is that the rule of law in international affairs still trumps raw power, especially military power. I think it's the other way around now. What Trump is teaching us is that this rules-based international order is of no concern to him. It is about great power politics, spheres of influence, national interests, and deal-making among those great powers. So what we in Germany and Europe need to learn is that we need to be more confident and better at playing the power game. We cannot rely on international institutions, friendships of the past, but we need to think in terms of interest and power. And this is something that, especially for Germany, with our history and the history of the Federal Republic, is not the usual way of looking at international affairs.
Is the danger that we keep interpreting today's events through the language of norms and institutions, while others are already acting on a very different assumptions of power, as you said, and land grabbing and all of the above? Yeah,
I think there is a danger in that. I am not arguing against norms and international law and international institutions. I think all of this is very important. It's actually a civilizational achievement. The world, really, not just we in Europe, but the world attained over the last couple of decades. But we need to understand that this international order will not hold if the United States, China, Russia, such great powers are not supporting this order any longer. In fact, with the US now actively working against it, thinking of Greenland, for instance, and Trump's rhetoric on that, we need to understand that if we want to uphold a rules-based order, as we live it here in Europe with the European Union and so forth, but also with the United Nations. If we want to uphold this kind of order, we need to increase our strengths. And this is, I think, the key challenge of the day.
I have to add here that we are recording on the 21st of January around noontime, when Trump is on its way to Davos and might have a deal for Greenland. We don't know. So what we know is that the world will be different when we air this episode to what we see today, just as a disclaimer.
Yeah, and if I might interject there, I think this is very telling in and of itself that you need to give a time and an hour to understand where we are at in international relations. This is a different world than the one we grew up in, because apparently there are no guarantees any longer. Everything seems to be in flux. There are many possibilities, especially with President Trump. Although he has a certain kind of set of beliefs, if you will, he's an instinctual politician. And although he is power-oriented, as we've said, you never know what he's going to do next. And you never know how seriously to take him in his sometimes very bold and rash demands. So things are uncertain. And we are living in an age of uncertainty. And to navigate this age of uncertainty, we need to stick together as Europeans, and we need to get better at the power game. We need to increase our militaries. We need to increase our economic prowess. And I think we can only do that together.
I want to pick up on that. So on this America first, Europe second topic, you've written that Trump's worldview isn't chaotic. It's, as you just mentioned, instinctive, transactional, and centered on strength. So from Europe's perspective, what does it mean for the transatlantic security guarantees in practical terms, not just rhetorically? And maybe you have some examples at hand. And I know that's very difficult these days.
Yeah. First off, I would say that especially with the transatlantic security relationship, rhetoric and practice are oftentimes intertwined. Take, for instance, Article 5, the security guarantee that is enshrined in the NATO treaty, which says that if one NATO country is attacked, the others will aid this country in whatever way. Article 5 is largely rhetoric. It is something that is written somewhere, that is open to interpretation, and that every member of NATO subscribes to, and that you signal to possible enemies, possible potential attackers, and say, you better not attack us because then we will all come upon you. This is rhetoric. This is not practice. It is something that you can train for, that you can plan for, and that is being done in NATO. You have all the troops planning and the contingency planning around it. But politically, it is rhetoric. It is a promise. Whether it is kept or not in the case of attack, nobody can know until there is an attack. And this is why the rhetoric is so important. In order for Article 5, for the deterrence of Article 5 to work, you need to be credible in your promise that you will stick together and that you will help each other. This is the signal of unity that NATO needs to send in order to guarantee that it's not being attacked. And what we have now is, with especially the Trump administration undermining the confidence, the trust in this promise of Article 5, is that you have a very practical effect. Although it's sheer rhetoric, you have the practical effect that everybody gets worried, that people need to think more about how they themselves, individual states in Europe themselves, how they can better protect themselves, even in case the US will not come to their aid. And this is, of course, a very difficult situation because this is very new. Since the Second World War, since 1945, since the creation of NATO in 1949, this has been the bedrock of European security for the West to begin with, then also after the fall of the Berlin Wall for the Warsaw Pact states as well. This has been the bedrock. We can rely on the US protecting us, coming to our aid, and we will all stick together. And I think this is the hardship of it. The Europeans have to understand that this bedrock doesn't hold any longer. It is very likely that the US, under a President Trump, will not come to the aid of European allies. Imagine, for instance, if Russia were to attack a Baltic state, say Estonia, the reaction of the Trump presidency might not be to say, okay, here we go, we will help you defend this alliance. But maybe President Trump will tweet out something like, okay, we will come to your aid, but only if you give us ABC, starting with Greenland or whatever the issue of the day is. And this is not how an alliance can work. Plus, we are in a different situation now. It's also a very practical political point. The Trump administration does not subscribe to the values that are the foundation of the NATO alliance, the liberal democratic values. They have a different attitude towards what democracy means and what the role of the United States in this liberal world order really is. And this also is a civil, cultural war within the NATO countries themselves. You see it in Europe as well, with the populist movements on the far right especially, and with the Trump administration in Washington. It is really a fight within NATO for who we want to be, what kind of society we want to be, what kind of rules we want to be governed by.
If I would try to summarize what you just said, does it go into a way that you risk becoming strategically optional in Washington's calculation if it doesn't demonstrate credible military and industrial capabilities?
Yes, I think the United States under President Trump only respect strength. So what we have is an international order of great powers that assess dominance in their spheres of influence and that pursue their national interests, with the national interests being very narrowly defined. And from that point of view, the United States is asking Europe, what is your value for us? What do we get from defending you, from having soldiers stationed in Ramstein and elsewhere in Europe and taking that continuous headache with the Russians over Ukraine? We don't care about Ukraine. It's a European problem. Why should we care? It's not our sphere of influence. And because this calculus is changing so much in Washington, we have to meet it. We have to get clear as Germans, but also as Europeans, what our key vital interests are and what we need to do to protect them. And I think that includes playing hardball with the United States and telling the Trump administration, look, if the only thing you respect is power and strength, we can play that game as well. And we will maybe kick you out of Ramstein or deny you access to certain trade benefits or to your bases in Europe. And thus, we can influence the calculus in Washington.
I think we are on a great point now that we can talk about Greenland. Renewed tensions around Greenland have startled many in Europe. So you argue this is not a provocation for provocation's sake, but a strategic signal. So what does Greenland tell us how security geography is being reprioritized? Is land grabbing the new normal?
If it is, then we are entering the world of the jungle again. Then everything is up for grabs. Then the only thing you really own is what you can defend with military force or political pressure. And if that starts again, we are back a couple of centuries and we will enter an era of many bloody wars and conflicts. So we really need to avoid this. On the Greenland question in particular, first, I think Trump has a point. Greenland is very important strategically for obvious reasons, the access to the Arctic, but also for missile defense systems for the United States, and also as a gateway to the Atlantic for Russian submarines and so forth. So it is very important. And I'm not even talking about the natural resources, which are plenty as well. So yes, it is strategically important. But all the economic and security concerns of the United States in Greenland can be met already, with the treaties being signed within NATO among Denmark, Greenland, and the United States in the 1950s already, then renewed in the 2000s. All these treaties basically allow the United States to pursue all their security and economic interests in Greenland already. So this is not really the point. The point for Trump, I believe, is that he is a real estate tycoon. He doesn't want to invest in anything he doesn't own. So he says, if we want to invest in Greenland, we should have control over it as well. And I think it plays a role with his view on European defense. He is unhappy, Trump is, with the many American soldiers and the expenses that come with it being stationed in continental Europe for the purpose of defending Europe. He wants to find a way out of there without losing the power projection to the Middle East and so forth. So he wants to find a way out of that, reduce that. But at the same time, he is all about securing his Western hemisphere, the sphere of influence of the United States. And so he's thinking about, where do I draw the line? If I'm not in continental Europe anymore, his gaze wanders and he ends up on Greenland and saying, this is then what we really need in order to secure our sphere of influence if we are not as present any longer in Europe. For the Europeans, all of that is an immense predicament, because the truth of the matter is, of course, that we cannot defend ourselves as of now without the United States support. We cannot counter Russian, Chinese, and other aggression and political pressure on our own, and not the way we are organized right now. We need to remedy this, and we have taken necessary steps. Think of the rearmament in Germany and across Europe, and steps to increase our competitiveness and everything, and also maybe to increase our political unity, although I have my doubts about this. So we are moving in a direction where we are less dependent on the United States, and I think this is very important that we do this. But at the same time, we still somehow need to keep the United States on board and keep Article 5 as alive as possible with this Trump administration. And this is a very difficult balancing act that we are navigating right now.
Let's talk about space, as we are SpaceWatch.Global, and try to merge geopolitics into that. Germany shifted away to see space as technology or just industry focused, now as hard security and defense. In a world of great power rivalry, what role does space play for deterrence, resilience, and strategic autonomy from your point of view? And again, we are recording it on the 21st of January, where in the evening of today, there will be the second attempt for ESA Aerospace from the Andoya spaceport for undermining what I just mentioned.
I don't think one needs to explain that to your audience here, the relevance and importance of space. But what I think is really crucial is what you say is that in the German government now, there seems to be an increasing understanding of the relevance of space, not just as a driver for technological innovation, but as a key element of national and European sovereignty, not just in terms of the economic aspects of it, but also the security aspects of it, the communications aspects of it. Without an independent and reliable, or at least reliable. You can switch between independent and reliable, but I think if it's with the United States, it's not reliable at the moment. So let's say an independent. Without an independent capacity in space, you are not a great power. You cannot play on the same level as other powers are playing. This is why space is so relevant. You cannot have proper defense without a presence in space. You will not have the intelligence about troop movements. You will not understand what's going on the ground. You will not be able to communicate with troops or with other actors on the ground without an independent and strong presence in space.
You just mentioned that our audience understands the importance of space, and I agree on that. But my question is more from your normal audience on the geopolitics, on the political sphere. Do they see space now in the importance that we always argued for, but it was, nice to have or cool to have something in space? Are we there now?
I think we are not there yet, but we are moving in the right direction. I think one initial starting point for, if you will, my community, the defense community and the decision makers thinking about security and international relations. For these people, I think one of the key moments was during the beginning of the full invasion of Ukraine, when SpaceX provided the communication tools for the Ukrainian defense efforts, and how crucial that was for Ukraine to withstand the Russian aggression. That was something where people said, okay, now we have a practical and easy to understand example of the relevance of space and also of our dependence on the United States. And even worse, not just the United States, but a private player within the United States. I think that was a key moment. And you can see some of the reactions with the current German government having a ministry that is responsible for space with Dorothee Bär. So we have a ministry now, which is, of course, an acknowledgement of the relevance of the field. And you have the announcement of Boris Pistorius to invest, I think it's 35 billion over the next couple of years in space technology for defense purposes. You have a similar commitment at the European Space Agency's Ministerial Council last fall, where Germany provided a lot of money also, in part at least, for dual use and also military and strategic purposes. So I think the understanding is slowly taking root, but we are not where we need to be. The capacities are simply not there yet. We have neglected this industry for too long, and we are slowly building up capacity. And I think this is one of the problems that we have. We have an enormous urgency right now to meet the challenge. We have to be speedy and at scale. And both are things that we haven't quite mastered yet at the moment.
As a last question or topic, I want to talk about Germany's time of decisions. You're right that Germany must finally distinguish between what is important and what is merely comfortable. And you just used your own words for that. From your perspective, where must Germany move faster? Capabilities, procurement, political clarity, or strategic culture, or all of the above?
All of the above is the right answer, but it's not a practical one because it's really about prioritizing things. So you cannot say all of the above. I think my key point that you refer to in the paper that I've published, I think the key point is that we need to realize in Germany, and this is a task for the government most of all, the highest ranks of our leadership, to understand what a decisive moment this is, with the United States basically divorcing the transatlantic partnership, with Europe on its own in a world that is defined by great power politics, that in this situation it is crucial that we focus not on the nice to have, but on the really existential. And the really existential for any state is the capacity to defend itself, to secure its borders and its population. It is not about income tax. It is not about pension plans. It is not about healthcare and education. As important as all of these things are, the very premier task of the state is security for its population, for its citizens. And I think to get this right, we need not only to invest in the Bundeswehr. This is happening, although I'd always argue it is still not at a sufficient scale and not at a sufficient speed. But it's also not enough to invest in the Bundeswehr. We need to understand that we need to be more competitive in our economies in order to play on the same level as the big powers are, and that we need to find a way for Europe to really synchronize its powers. My great worry at the moment is that with the United States more or less slowly or suddenly, abruptly leaving Europe on its own, this will not galvanize the European states into one coherent bloc, one coherent position, be it in the EU or in a different alliance coalition of the willing, that this will not happen. This is what should happen, but maybe it will not. Maybe if the US is leaving quickly, we will fracture in Europe. We will become like Southeast Asia has been for a couple of decades, a number of states with individual security arrangements with the United States, but not a union anymore. And this is not allowed to happen.
I do have a final question because I can't leave it. And I hope that we will see some positive outcome here. What does responsible leadership from Germany look like in 2026 if European consensus remains slow, as you just mentioned?
I think we cannot afford to wait for consensus within the EU. We need to have coalitions of the willing. We need to have countries that move one step ahead. That doesn't mean that we need to, as Germany, need to act on our own and be lonely leaders. No, we should build coalitions. We should listen to others. We should find synergy wherever it's possible. But we need to move forward, both on defense and on economic competitiveness, on technological innovation, and we need to find ways to regain our strength. Less bureaucracy, less distractions. To say something that is quite unpopular also here at the German Council on Foreign Relations, as important as the fight against climate change is, I don't think it's a top priority right now. At least not if it's at the cost of competitiveness. We need to get a strong economy, we need to get a strong military, and we need to get a strong political union in order to survive with our way of life in this new world order.
Patrick, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for bringing this clarity to the debate that often hides behind abstractions. And with that, SpaceWatch out. Thank you.
Thank you, Torsten. A pleasure.
If you like these or other episodes of Space Café Radio, leave us a rating on your preferred podcast platform. It is the currency of today. And if you want to stay on the pulse of the space industry, please visit our website at www.SpaceWatch.Global and subscribe to our newsletters. And of course, don't forget to become a Space Watcher. I'm Torsten Triening, publisher at SpaceWatch.Global, your independent perspective on space.